about hope. I think that most people have a desire to see our world free from harm. As we talk today about abuse and neglect, I would like for us to hold this word hope in our minds. For those who have been abused and neglected, this can be a hard topic to hear or talk about. And as I prepare for this training, I did it with a caring heart, knowing that many of us might be affected on a personal level. I say this because I will be providing examples of abuse in some scenarios. It is a hard topic to talk about, but it is necessary. We at the Peer Self-Advocacy Program feel it is important to define what is abuse and to learn how to address it. Today's topic is how to address abuse and neglect in licensed facilities and community settings. Please, if at any time during the presentation you feel you need to step away, know it is okay to do so. It is important that we listen to our minds and our bodies. Self-care is important to us. Remember to breathe and take care of your needs. On the left side of the screen, I have a picture of two persons holding hands. Over the hands, there's a question that reads, do you know the signs of elder abuse? So before we continue with today's topic, I would like to tell you a little bit about our organization, Disability Rights California. Disability Rights California is California's protection and advocacy system. Our mission is to defend, advance, and strengthen the rights and opportunities of people with disabilities. On our Disability California logo is located on the right side of this slide, and the letters are green and teal. Disability Rights California has different units. I work for the Peer and Self-Advocacy Program. I have the good fortune of working with wonderful peers who are here today. Later on, Sophia Trexler will help us with the Q&A section of this presentation. And Brent Chamberlain will be working behind the scenes, making sure everything runs smoothly. Thank you to all that are helping with this presentation. Here on this slide, I have a list of our peer and self-advocacy services. So what do? We facilitate self-advocacy groups in mental health facilities and state hospitals. We provide trainings to people with significant mental health illness and mental health service providers on legal rights and access to services. And we help participants develop self-advocacy skills and strategies to advocate for their own goals and services. Here I have some disclaimer statements. During the training, I will not be providing legal advice. This training is being provided from a peer perspective. So I'm a person with a mental health disability with a lived experience, and also nothing said during this training is confidential. If you have a disability-related legal issue that you would like to discuss with Disability Rights California, please call our intake line at 1-800-776-5746. Our training agenda for today is who are elders and dependent adults. We will define differences between abuse and neglect. We will talk about how to address abuse and neglect, when and where to report it, the effects of abuse and neglect on victims. So there are different definitions of abuse. One of the definitions could be abuse is mistreatment that causes harm to another person through fear, violence, neglect, or bullying. The definition that appears on this slide, I find is the most appropriate for today's topic. And that definition is any intentional or negligent act by a care custodian that causes harm to an elder or dependent adult is abuse. A care custodian is defined as an administrator or an employee of a public or private facility who provides care for elders and dependent adults as part of their duties, including support and maintenance staff. So abuse can happen to an elder person or dependent adult. An elderly person would be anyone who is 65 years old or older. A dependent adult is anyone 18 to 64 years of age with physical disabilities, developmental disabilities, or mental health disabilities. Dependent adults may live independently and have physical or mental limitations that restrict their ability to carry out normal activities or protect their rights. Dependent adults may also be persons who have been admitted to a licensed facility or live in a community setting. Definitions from this slide were taken from the Welfare Institutions Code 15610.23. On the lower side of the screen, I have a picture of two hands that seem to be from an elder person. This person has their hands folded together. Abuse can happen in licensed facilities or community settings. They can happen in board and care, room and board, psychiatric hospitals, locked facilities, nursing homes, or long-term care facilities. I would like now to tell you a little bit about each of these places I just mentioned. So a board and care is an adult residential care facility licensed by the state of California, Department of Social Services, Community Care Licensing. These facilities provide care and supervision to adults ages 18 to 59 who have mental health disabilities. Room and board are unlicensed, privately operated residential facilities for independent living. Psychiatric hospitals are hospitals where people in crisis are monitored and provided assessment, as well as therapy and medication management. Locked facilities are for persons with mental health disabilities that need subacute level of care, but still require a locked setting. Nursing homes are also skilled nursing facilities. Residents staying in nursing homes generally have complex medical needs and require a higher level of care than individuals living in retirement communities or assisted living. And long-term care facilities provide both medical and personal support services to patients who are unable to live independently. So elder and dependent adult abuse can consist of neglect or abuse, which can be physical, sexual, psychological, including verbal abuse, and it can also be financial abuse. Let me define each type of neglect and abuse. So neglect is when a caregiver does not take reasonable care of the elderly or dependent adult they are supposed to. For example, failure to assist in personal hygiene or in the provision of food, clothing, or shelter. Physical abuse is causing pain or injury, using unreasonable physical restraints, or not allowing the person enough food or water. Sexual abuse is sexual assault or rape. Psychological, it's including verbal abuse, which it could be causing mental pain like humiliating, intimidating, or threatening. And financial is using an elderly or dependent person's money or property illegally or improperly without their consent for someone else's benefit. On the right side of this slide, I have listed some characteristics of abuse. Abuse can be hurtful, manipulative, controlling, deceptive, unpredictable, and usually escalates. What can start as psychological abuse can turn to another form of abuse. So here I have some examples of abuse. On the right side, I have phrases number 1 through 4, and on the right side, I have the types of abuse with letters A through D. I will read the phrase that corresponds to each of the abuse. So number 1, slapping, hitting, causing pain is physical abuse. Number 2, failure to provide for physical or emotional needs. It's B, neglect. And 3, stealing money from an elderly person's possession for personal use would be C, financial abuse. And number 4, treating a dependent adult with insults and degrading language is verbal abuse. So anyone can be an abuser. It could be a treatment provider. It can be a caregiver, such as a family member or a friend, or a person paid by an agency to take care of an elder or dependent adult in their home. If abuse and neglect take place, it needs to be reported. So now I have defined what abuse is. Now let's talk about abuse reporting. If you are an employee of a licensed facility, your employment position falls within the definition of a mandated reporter. And mandated reporters are persons who observe, have knowledge of, or reasonably suspect abuse in a licensed facility or community setting. Mandated reporters can be facility maintenance staff, treatment providers, including therapists, psychiatrists, dietary staff, activities directors, physical therapists, licensed vocational nurses, or clergy members. If you're an employee of a licensed facility, your employment position falls within the definition of the mandated reporter. Therefore, you must comply with the elder and dependent adult abuse reporting requirements. And you can find those in the Welfare Institutions Code 15630. And the letter H would indicate that if you fail to report, you can be guilty of a misdemeanor. So abuse can be reported to law enforcement, adult protective services, or long-term care ombudsman. Later in the presentation, I will let you know what is the role of each of these agencies in the reporting process. In the next couple of slides, we will first talk about what needs to be done if you suspect, see, or have knowledge of abuse. So in this slide, we will talk about ways to report non-physical abuse. And this would be mental suffering, financial abuse, isolation, neglect. When this type of abuse happens, we would call immediately long-term care ombudsman or law enforcement, make a written report, SOC 341 within 2 days to long-term care ombudsman or the law enforcement. If the abuse is physical and results in serious bodily injury, then the call will be made to 911 or law enforcement. And the report will be made, or the SOC 341 will be made to within 2 hours to the long-term care ombudsman and law enforcement. And what is an SOC 341? So it is a form that documents the information given by the reporting party on the suspected incident of abuse or neglect, an elder or dependent adult. This form needs to be this form needs to be filled out by the mandated reporter. And if abuse is physical and there's no serious bodily injury, you would call 24 hours, within 24 hours, the law enforcement, or make written reports, the SOC 341 within 24 hours to long-term care ombudsman and the law enforcement, the local law enforcement agency. Law enforcement, so here we're going to learn what each of these do with law enforcement, adult protective services, and long-term care ombudsman. They do. Let's begin with law enforcement. So they respond to emergencies, crisis situations, ensure immediate safety, apprehend and possibly arrest, and they investigate suspected criminal offenses. Adult Protective Services, they investigate reports of elder or dependent adult abuse and neglect in private homes, public settings, apartments, boarding homes, hospitals. And Adult Protective Services, so what do? They provide crisis intervention and referrals. They cross-report to law enforcement. And according to Adult Protective Services website, they do not disclose information to reporting parties. They cannot make someone change their lifestyle, and they cannot remove someone from their home against their will. Long-term care ombudsman program investigates reports of abuse in long-term facilities like licensed residential care facilities, assisting living facilities, adult day programs, nursing homes, rehabilitation centers, intermediate care facilities, adult day care programs. And they enhance the quality of life in long-term care facilities. So long-term care ombudsman program advocates for their clients' wishes. So according to the long-term care ombudsman website, they need appropriate consent from client or client's representative to refer the case to law enforcement if it appears to be abuse or neglect has taken place, and the ombudsman representative has limited authority to compel victims or alleged offenders to do anything. And now here's a summary of what we learned in the past couple of slides. So to whom should the abuse and neglect report be made to? So if the abuse has occurred in a long-term care facility except a state hospital, the report should be made to the local ombudsman office or the local law enforcement agency. If the abuse has occurred any place other than one described above, the report should be made to the Adult Protective Services Agency. If abuse happens in a state hospital, the report should be made to the hospital police department. So during the rest of the presentation, I will be providing 3 scenarios. As I read each scenario, I will be posting some questions and providing answers for those questions. The first scenario is, what are John's options? John lives in a boarding care facility where he is constantly abused by staff Tony. Tony hits John on the head and pinches his arm every time John drops his food on the floor. John doesn't want to report him because he is afraid Tony will do harmful things to him if he does. What are John's options? So the question for this slide was, what can John do? So John can report the physical abuse to Tony's supervisor or call the local care ombudsman program. And here, I would like to emphasize that if you're being abused, you can call law enforcement, adult protective services, or long-term care ombudsman yourself at any time. Or you can tell staff in the facility where you live about the abuse. So as mandated reporters, they can report the abuse for you. So in this case, let's say that John decides to talk to Supervisor Emily. What can he expect to happen? So John, so as a mandated reporter, Emily will need to ask John questions about the abuse, such as when does Tony hit him? How does he hit him? Where does the abuse take place? Here, I would like to emphasize that John might feel intimidated or nervous about the questions. However, if Emily is going to make an abuse report, she needs to ask questions. So after John answers the questions and shows Supervisor Emily the marks Tony leaves on his arm, Emily decides to call the local law enforcement, makes a written report to local law enforcement agency and the local ombudsman office. So here's scenario 2. What type of abuse is this? So Kathy lives in a nursing facility where Nurse Thomas is constantly asking her for money. Thomas tells Kathy that he has a daughter who is sick at home and he needs money for her medicines. Kathy has given Thomas $10 every time they go to Walmart for the community outings. Kathy feels empathy for Thomas. What kind of abuse could this be? So the answer would be financial abuse. Kathy is being manipulated by Thomas to give him money. But let's say that Kathy talks to the nursing home chaplain about Thomas' situation. She tells the chaplain that she is worried about Thomas' daughter and hopes the money she gives him is helping them get by. So is the chaplain a mandated reporter? So here I would like to emphasize that before So the answer is yes, because the chaplain is providing services to persons living in the nursing home. Here, I would like to emphasize that before making the decision to report, the chaplain should ask more questions to determine if the situation needs to be reported. In some cases, the mandated reporter needs the consent from the elder or dependent adult to report the abuse or neglect. Even if the chaplain decides not to make the report to local ombudsman or law enforcement, he should report to the nursing home supervisor. But let's say he decides to report what Kathy tells him as financial abuse because she doesn't want to give Thomas the money, but she feels obligated to do so. Who should the chaplain make the report to? Should he report to A, Adult Protective Services, B, Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program, C, Law Enforcement, D, tell Kathy their secret is safe with him, or E, B, and C? So the answer would be E, will be E and C. He could report it to Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program or law enforcement. Then we'll go to scenario 3, neglect in a psychiatric hospital. So Mr. James is living in a psychiatric hospital. Staff Sandra throws Mr. James' lunch away every day. However, on Mr. James' meal report, Sandra marks down that Mr. James eats all his meals. Mr. James has lost 15 pounds in the last 3 months. While checking Mr. James' medical chart, social worker Bernice notices that Mr. James has lost a significant amount of weight. What should Bernice do? So the answer would be for social worker Bernice should check in with Mr. James and ask him questions about the situation. He tells her that Sandra is throwing away his lunch. And he also tells her that he's afraid of Sandra and fears retaliation. So what should Bernice do? Where should Bernice Bernice make a report to. So she should report it to the Term Care Advancement Program or law enforcement. So either one would be ideal. And then, so now I would like to ask you two questions. The first one, why is reporting abuse and neglect important? And the second question is, have you ever been abused and did not report it? So I have been abused. I was raped by someone who I trusted. It started with psychological abuse that made me feel insecure and afraid. And it escalated to sexual abuse. I didn't report it. Instead, I made the choice to keep silent about it, mostly because I was afraid. And I was convinced that it was my fault. Many years after therapy, I was able to talk about it. And just like me, many elder and dependent adults remain silent for fear of retaliation from their abusers. Sometimes the victim thinks the abuse is their fault. In most cases, abuse and neglect escalates if there is no intervention. Abuse and neglect can lead to physical injuries, premature death, depression, cognitive decline, financial devastation. Any type of mistreatment can leave the abused person feeling depressed and fearful. I started this presentation speaking about hope. Hope for me is the thing that helps me get through the darkest times in my life. I too hope that someday we are all free of all kinds of harm, especially abuse and neglect. Now I would like to leave you with some resources to report abuse. So for the Adult Protective Services, we can call this number, which is 1-833-401-0832. We can enter the 5-digit zip code to be connected to the, so you would enter your 5-digit zip code to be connected to the APS in your county, and you can call 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Or you can call Long-Term Care Advancement Program and the crisis line at 1-800-231-4024. Now, if you have a disability and have concerns about your rights and would like to talk about them with Disability Rights California, please call our confidential intake phone number at 1-800-776-5746, or for TTY, call 1-800-719-5798. Our DRC website is www. the word disability, the words rights, ca.org. And you can call Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. They are available from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And they're not taking live calls on Wednesdays, weekends, or holidays. If you have suggestions for mental health related webinars, please write to us. Our email address is capital P, capital S, capital A at disabilityrightsca.org. And also the recording of this presentation will be available upon request. You can send us an email to our PSA email address. And again, that's PSA at disabilityrightsca.org. Before you exit the training, please answer a 3 simple question survey. But before that, I'll leave you with, well, actually, I'm going to ask Sophia to help us with the question and comment section of this training. So Sophia, if you can help us.
Hi guys, my name is Sophia. I work in the peer self-advocacy unit with Maria. So if you have any questions, on the bottom bar of your screen, there's a Q&A box, or you can raise your hand if you would like to verbally speak your question. And if you're connected to us by a phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. It doesn't look like we have any questions right now. So now would be the time if you have any questions, or if you even just wanted to drop in the chat and thank Maria for preparing such an inspiring presentation for us and for sharing her story. You can do that as well.
Thank you, Sophia.